Hello, can you hear me? Hello. Yes, thank you.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. Hello and welcome, dear participants, to our session today entitled Innovative Solutions to Address the Hazardousness of Chemical and Biological Waste in the Environment. You're enjoying a course offered thanks to the support of the GEF CReW Plus project, whose purpose is to provide knowledge and a space for the co creation of water and sanitation solutions in the wider Caribbean region. The GEF CReW Plus is a collaborative project funded by the Global Environment Facility, co-implemented by the Inter-American Development Bank and the United Nations Environment Program in 18 countries in the wider Caribbean region. GEF CReW Plus is being executed on behalf of the German of the IDB by the German Agency for International Cooperation and the Organization of American States, and on behalf of the United Nations Environment Program by the Secretariat of the Cartagena Convention. The GEF CReW Plus project offers innovative nature-based solutions to mitigate the effects of untreated wastewater on the environment and public health. The Central American Institute for Public Administration, ICAP, is the institution that specializes in the education and training of human resources at the local, national, and regional level. So it's a pleasure for us to be the institution in charge of facilitating this learning space. The institution was created in 1954 within the United Nations with the support of the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, within the General Secretariat of the Central American Integration System. My name is Maria Paola Rojas, and I'm the project assistant. I will be the person who will accompany the teacher this morning. And before we begin, the session will be recorded and uploaded to the ICA Virtual Campus website. If you do not wish to be recorded, I kindly request that you indicate this via the meeting chat. The training provided in the framework of this academic program will be divided into modules. This session belongs to Module 6, the last module, in which we will address the circular economy in medicines, the orientation of the regulatory structure related to medicine waste management, and the identification of public policies related to medicine waste. In addition, also we remind you that upon active participation during the synchronous sessions and the completion of the evaluation activities hosted in the Big ECAP virtual campus, you can opt for a certificate of achievement issued by ECAP with regional recognition. Now I will introduce the facilitator of the module. The facilitator with us today is Marisol Flores. She has a master's degree in sustainable health services administrations and a master's degree in intellectual property. She currently works as a pharmaceutical consultant and has been a professor and lecturer at the Universidad de las Ciencias Médicas, University of Medical Science. She also has experience in project management, regulatory affairs of products of health interest, pharmacovigilance, and pharmaceutical logistics. So I will give the floor to Marisol to begin Module 6. Marisol?
Thank you, Paula, for the presentation, and thank you all for being here this morning. I am very grateful for the opportunity of bringing this message to you and hopefully be able to create some echo of these messages for you to carry around. So give me just a second to share my presentation. Just want to check if you are actually seeing it. Can someone confirm that you're looking at the slides? Yeah, thank you. Well, so then again, thank you so much for your valuable time. And I hope this conversation is useful to you in your daily work, and especially, as I mentioned before, to be able to carry this message around, which is actually very important, not only at a professional level, but also at a personal level, since each and every one of us is a pharmaceutical product user and a personal care product user. So I think it's important to, to think of this as a broader issue rather than just focusing on the little details, but let's focus on the broader picture. So today we're going to talk about this, as I mentioned, the environmental impact and other negative results of the inadequate disposal of PPCPs, which are pharmaceutical and personal care products. So the specific topics that we will be discussing today are regarding pharmaceutical and personal care products, also known as PPCPs, the environmental impact of PPCPs, all the ongoing initiatives that are aimed to the minimization of this environmental impact, and what alternatives of water purification do we currently have to actually address this matter. So it is important for you to know that it is a fact that pharmaceuticals are mixed in water, and bottom line is that even if we cannot actually see those this residue in the water, and we cannot detect these contaminants with our eyes or with our senses, there's now enough evidence that this waste is actually there, and that we are actually having harmful or poisonous consequences due to this type of waste in the water. So that's what we are going to focus on this morning. So, well, it would be important for us today to recognize the current evidence regarding the environmental impact of PPCP's waste, as well as the actions related to governance, public policy, and contention proposals that actually aim for the solution of this issue. Hopefully, we can acknowledge the presence of PPCP's molecules in water, soil beds, and vegetable products also. Identify the regulatory structure that different countries have developed to address the issues related to PPCP's waste. Identify public policy tendencies related to pharmaceutical waste, especially what concerns the industrial, commercial, and domestic part. I would emphasize on the domestic part ahead. Hopefully, you can become aware of the actions and proposals that are aimed at reducing PPCP's contents in water, and evaluate the implementation of innovative proposals considering circular economy, as Paula has already mentioned. So regarding the evolution of the detection of pharmaceutical products and personal healthcare products, before the 90s, actually what was researched was what were considered to be conventional priority pollutants, which were specifically like pesticides and industrial intermediates that were considered to be toxic or carcinogenic, and that had persistency in the environment. So before the 90s, we actually didn't have that much research going on regards to pharmaceutical products specifically. And even though there were some studies published, this was actually not the focus of research or further investigation. So after the 90s, what we have come to realize is that pharmaceutical waste or PPCP's waste is not only due to prescription drugs and biologics that are used at the human and veterinary level, but that there are also other pollutants such as diagnostic agents, nutraceuticals, fragrances, sunscreens, and many other numerous agents. So let's even consider for a minute that all of the drugs, for example, that are used at a veterinary level. Let's think of all the vaccines that farm animals are given, in every year or every month or in every certain period of time, and even sometimes to increase their body weight so that when we are eating meat, we have a juicier steak or a juicier fish or whatever. So this has only not become a problem at the human level, but also at the animal level. And we are talking here not only about the waste of the drugs as such, but also because of the leftover packaging of the drugs that end up getting into the environment. And the other consideration, which I consider is very, very important, is that we are continually introducing these complex mixtures into the environment. And this happens through a number of different routes, primarily by both treated and untreated sewage. And since medications and personal care products have such a wide combination of ingredients, these mixtures can actually very chemically complex. So we cannot talk only about one chemical or a group of chemicals, but almost like an infinite number combination of complex chemicals or compounds that are actually being introduced into the environment every moment. So it is important for us to highlight that when we talk about this kind of waste, we are not talking only about one product or one thing, and rather a very, very broad amount of different chemical substances that may react differently when in contact with human beings or animals. So one thing most people, I'm sure, know, but we don't really emphasize this enough, is that every time we use a medication, we are the users or the consumers of this drug, of this product, and a certain amount, depending on the specific medication I'm using, a certain amount of this drug will end up in my excretions untouched. So as you can see in this table, for atenolol, for example, which is a beta blocker, a medication that is used for the treatment of high blood pressure, this drug is excreted in urine and feces up to 90%. So this means that 90% of this drug reaches the water untouched. Some other medications may be further metabolized, which means that they are chemically changed or modified in our bodies before excretion. And the substances that end up being excreted, which in pharmacology are called metabolites, may also have an activity at the molecular level of human beings and animals. So that is very important to know. Even if we are very conscientious medicine users, every time we use medications, we end up putting active ingredients into the ground, into the water. And we can come to think about it even from the perspective of how many people in the world are chronic medication users and take a certain number of drugs daily that end up in our sewage waters, right? The other thing that's very important to know here is that usually traditional water treatment plants cannot treat these compounds, and basically these compounds that reach the water are, can get back to us with almost no change or very little change. And we can add to that not only the drug excretion as such, but also all the personal care products that we use daily that might end up reaching the water. So PPCPs, as I told you before, is an acronym used referring to the whole group, including pharmaceutical products, medicines, and also personal care products that we use every day. But let's focus first on the definition of a pharmaceutical product. Each medicine or each pharmaceutical product is made up of, let's say, two bigger parts. One is the active ingredient or ingredients, which is the exact chemical or pharmacological compound that is going to have a therapeutic effect on the body of a human being or an animal. Usually, active ingredients in a formulation are present in a smaller quantity or in a smaller percentage. And then what makes up the whole pharmaceutical form or the whole formulation are mainly excipients, which are stream or whatever. So as I mentioned before, these can be very complex formulations and can have a very numerous amount of different ingredients that have different chemical characteristics. And this gives us also from a, from a health, public health point of view, the chance to develop different pharmaceutical forms and different drugs for different users that have different needs. But at the end of the day, what I'm trying to highlight here is that these can be very complex and very different types of the formulations that will end up, in our waters or in the environment. When a new drug or a new medicine is developed, especially nowadays with all the technology that we have, is that drug developers are trying to use excipients that have a longer effect on the human body. And this is done so that patients don't have to take many doses of the same drug during the day, and we can reduce the number of doses for the patient. And these help us have more compliant patients. But yeah, imagine if this drug or if these excipients stay longer in the human blood. When they reach the environment, they will also linger there longer. So new formulations that are actually very good for our patients and very good for the treatment of numerous diseases can also create a very big environmental impact. When we talk about personal care products, maybe we don't have a specific active ingredient. Rather, we have a huge amount of combinations of excipients or substances that are the ones that allow for this formulation to to clean or to maintain the good condition of our skin or to protect us from UV rays or whatever. So personal care products in particular can have a very huge combination of different chemicals or compounds that will also be excreted through our bodies, and that will end up in the water that we use for washing up and everything else. So from a pharmacy, let's say, point of view, we consider these PCPs as one whole thing, especially when we consider waste, and when we consider residue, we think of both types of products as like a whole package. So PPCPs would be then pharmaceutical products, medicines, and all the personal care products we use on a daily basis. So how do medicines work? Of course, this is not a pharmacology class, and I don't intend on making, any specific pharmacologic input here, rather than just that you have time to think a little of how we are actually putting active ingredients and drug residues through our bodies all the time. When we usually drink or take by mouth any medication, it will reach our stomach and then our intestinal system, and then it will travel through our blood, through our circulatory system, thanks to our kidneys and through our liver. This drug that we consumed will be metabolized, will be possibly changed chemically and turned into a different compound that is going to be excreted mainly through our urine and through our feces. So that's why I keep insisting that we are constantly inserting drug waste into the environment. Each and every one of us, as a drug user or consumer, does this on a regular basis. Now let's think about certain groups of people. For example, older adults. It has been estimated that older citizens in a median take up to 9 different drugs every day. And with an increasing population of older adults, this means that we are living longer, but we are also, of course, taking a lot more medications that we used to, that are the ones that, keep us alive, to say that way. But these are also put back into the environment. So this is not a problem that's going to end up anytime soon. And we could also say, or I'd better say, that this is a problem that is going to continue increasing. And then again, I am talking here only of the regular, rational, conscientious use of drugs, but also let's think of all the medications that patients do not take as they are supposed to, and they become unused or expired, and they end up also in our regular trash or garbage. Starting with the reports and the studies that have been published, but by 1965, we already had the Sturm-Solinger study that had already demonstrated that hormones and leftover hormones from different treatments cannot be eliminated through regular water treatments. So by 1965, we were already talking about hormone presence in the environment. And by 1999, one of the most important studies was published, and it was one of the first times that we started having enough evidence that there are antibiotics in our waters. And I'm sure you must have heard by now that antibiotic or antimicrobial resistance is a huge public health issue, because we are actually not, for some time now, have not been able to try to treat certain types of infections, because the antibiotics that we have now are starting not to be efficient. This means that bacteria have actually become resistant to the effect of these antibiotics, and there is enough evidence now that lingering antibiotics in the environment actually help these bacteria to become resistant. to the antibiotics that we now or still have. And then again, I am not talking only about the regular use of antibiotics, like if you have a sore throat or a real infection and you are prescribed antibiotics and you take them as prescribed. But there are also irrational uses of antibiotics or inadequate uses. I'm sure you already know this. Antibiotics are sometimes used in farm animals to increase their body weight, for example. So it's not only the regular use of the drugs, but also the irrational use of these medications. If you do a basic search of this topic online, you will be able to see that one of the recurrent topics is endogenous hormones and the amount of a very big amount of hormone waste in waters, which I will get into more detail later on. So how do we know? I mean, how do we really have proof that there's leftover drugs or chemicals in our water? Well, thanks to the technology, we have had huge advances in drug analytical methods, and we have special machinery and technology and mechanisms now that allow us to detect traces or very small amounts of drugs in water. And sometimes the popular belief is that since there are only traces of these substances in water, or very small amounts of these chemicals in waters, they probably have little to no impact on human beings or on the environment. But now, thanks to particle detection up to micrograms per liter, we have had enough evidence to prove that actually these very, very small amounts of waste in the water can have very hazardous and poisonous effects. So these are the main, let's say, contamination routes due to the use of human and veterinary medications. So as I told you before, every time you use a medication, you are excreting the active ingredient untouched or metabolites which are new compounds that end up in the sewer system. And as you can see there in the picture, they can end up in our surface waters and in our drinking water, but let's also think about not only what is excreted through the human body, but also the waste, the domestic waste. Even if we do take our medications appropriately, we have leftover packaging that is contaminated or can have residues or traces of the drug that we took, and these may end up in our regular trash cans, which will then end up in the landfill, and then on and on until they reach our drinking water. So certainly one of the main routes of contamination is due to human medicine. But as I mentioned earlier, let's also think about the huge amount of veterinary medications that are used and the reasons why we are using these medications. So as I told you before, let's think about all the vaccines that are given to farm animals, or to the hormones that are given to these animals to increase their body weight. And not only that, but also let's think about all the leftover packaging, syringes, ampules, and all types of packaging that end up in farms and that may end up, being put under the soil or in the regular trash or garbage. and that will in the end inevitably reach, the food chain and the groundwater. So of course, this is an increasing issue, and we have to take into consideration not only humans, but our increasing farm animal populations. And there have been several studies that have, detected the presence of pharmaceuticals in surface waters. Um, Medications or active ingredients related to heart medications, anti-inflammatory, contraceptives that are made of hormones. Um, some recent studies have even demonstrated that more than 50 pharmacological active ingredients have been detected in the rivers of the United States. These 50 pharmacological active ingredients, as I mentioned before, could be totally different chemicals with totally different specifications and characteristics. And this complicates getting these out of water and out of the environment, as I will detail in some further slides. And especially what we know now is that most water polluted with drugs comes from local treated and untreated sources. So I think this is very, very important information to keep in mind. Let's see this table. That's from the United States. This is fairly recent data. If we go into detail of the drugs that are usually polluting water, there is a high amount of antibiotics, as I mentioned, but also a lot of chronic treatments, such as antidepressants, such as high blood pressure medication and the sort. So then again, let's reflect on the amount of chronic users of medications that end up excreting medications daily through their feces or through their urine. The Europe situation is not different. There have been numerous studies now in Europe too. Results are pretty much the same. The same type of active ingredients that are polluting European waters are pretty much the same as in the States. We have chronic treatments, we have antibiotics, we have anti-inflammatories. So, of course, these are some of the medications that are used more frequently worldwide in all types of populations. And we have very interesting, very, very fresh and recent data, for example, from the National Academy of Sciences of the United States that was published this year. And go figure, what we already knew, there's a lot of pollution in the world's rivers due to medication. And as you can see, a little dot there in the map, I mean, everywhere, geographically speaking, has it been determined that there's water pollution. Some studies have even focused on the ice and the icebergs on the poles. And cocaine, antidepressant, and other illicit drugs are present in very high amounts in the ice that are on the poles of the planet. So, of course, as I mentioned, it is a huge issue, and it has also been getting more coverage and more research since the early 90s. Some studies have even come as far as comparing per capita income to the concentration of active ingredients or drug residues in water. So if you see the bottom part of this graph, you would think that it doesn't matter, it's not such a big difference between the low income and the upper income properties regarding the concentration of drugs that are present in water. But if you think of the countries that actually have the biggest concentration of drugs in their waters, you can see that lower and middle income countries apparently have higher concentrations of drugs in their water. So that would be a very interesting research to carry out what it is socially or culturally that creates this type of situation. Then again, this reinforces what we have known now for more than 10 years, and it is that there's medication and there are drug active ingredients all around us, all different types of medication, as I mentioned before. Some medications or in higher concentrations are related to chronic treatment, but we also have this huge amount of waste related to antibiotics also. So as you can see in this graph, there are very, very numerous active ingredients that have been detected. And as I mentioned, they are very chemically there's not a one size fits all approach to this problem. I'm sorry, but for some reason, my presentation stopped. Give me a minute. Are you looking at the presentation now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So, as I told you, there's not a one size fits all type of solution. And the current options that we have for treating water now cannot address each and every one of the active ingredients that have been detected in water. Mostly, there are a number of sites, almost all the sites that you can see in the blue color, that have shown exceeded concentrations of these active ingredients, and in concentrations that have already proven to cause adverse drug reactions in human beings and in animals. So it's not only a matter of how much is in there, but as little as it is actually there, how much of that little part can have a direct effect on people's health and in animals' health. So I think this is a very interesting slide in that sense. So there's this publication from the World Health Organization from 2012 that had already addressed the issue of pharmaceuticals in drinking water. So this document that I would highly suggest that you can study in detail has demonstrated, as I mentioned before, with sufficient data that there's a lot of drug presence in our water and in our drinkable water. It also talks about the assessment of the risk of this pharmaceutical waste in drinking water to human health. There's actually a whole new branch of pharmacology studies, which is called ecopharmacovigilance, which is a science that studies these hazardous effects on human health and on the environment as a whole. This document also talks about what treatment technologies are actually available nowadays for removing pharmaceuticals from drinking water, and what preventive measures we can take to, prevent this issue. I would think that it is very important for us to acknowledge here that, as I have mentioned before, since drugs and medications can be such different types of compounds with very, very complex characteristics, rather than thinking of how we are going to treat contaminated waters, the first thing we should be thinking about is how we are going to prevent this waste for reaching the water that we are drinking. So the ongoing monitoring of all pharmaceutical active ingredients is costly, and there is no current infrastructure available to carry it out. So even if we do have some technology and some mechanisms to get rid of these molecules in water, there's no one system that is 100% effective to treat all different types of water. And it's not only that there's no technology available, but only that it's not possible in a practical sense. For all these studies I have mentioned results for example, these what they do is they take samples from rivers or surface waters at a moment given in time. So this would mean almost like taking a picture of a photograph of a situation, of a moment, specific moment in time that may or maybe not be replicated in the future. So a permanent monitoring of drugs in water is nearly impossible, and that is something important for you to know. Some concentrations that have been identified in discharged waters are less than 0.1 microgram per liter, which is very little. And sometimes in drinking water concentrations are less than 0.05 micrograms per liter. So that may sound like something very small. But if you compare that here to this graph, you would see that even very low concentrations as the ones that have been detected can actually result as harmful for fish and invertebrates and other types of species. So let me go back to this and remember about these less than 0.1 micrograms or less than 0.05 micrograms. And as you see here at the bottom part of this chart, for example, you see this estradiol, which is a female hormone. Even in such low concentrations as this one on the bottom, 0.00000001, have already proven to create harmful effects, biochemical, cellular, and behavioral hazardous effects in these animals. So as I mentioned before, even though we cannot see these compounds in the water or taste them or perceive them through our senses, they are actually there. And even though they are in very low concentrations, these very small concentrations can have a harmful effect in fish and invertebrates, human beings, and all other types of animals. So there have been publications of specific case reports like this one in this slide about the vulture population. So between the 1990 and 2000, the population of some species of vultures decreased by 95%, close to 95%. So after a lot of research, the conclusion or the results show that the use of diclofenac, which is an anti-inflammatory in cattle, produced lethal liver damage to vultures because these vultures fed off the cattle's carrion. So The cattle was dying, the vultures were feeding off these dead cattle, and they ended up poisoned by the diclofenac left in the cattle's body. So when the vultures died, the lack of vultures then produced a buildup of carrion, and as a consequence of that, the rat population increased. And having more rats ended up creating a rabies outbreak. So as in everything in nature, and as you know, we are part of a bigger chain, and everything that is turned around in this chain can have not only ecological consequences, but also health and cultural consequences. So we should start seeing the broader picture and not only, as I mentioned, focus specifically on drugs, but what is the broader impact of this residue in the environment. So now, this is another interesting case report regarding feminized male fish, or what is called in medicine an endocrine disruption. So researchers started seeing female characteristics in male fish. That was the first thing. What they noticed was the presence of testicles and immature ovules up to in 64% of the male fish population. So what this created was, first of all, sterilization of male fish, and also in an abnormal nesting behavior, frail eggshells, and disruption of the immune system of these beings. So as I had mentioned earlier, the presence of hormone-like compounds may come from a different variety of sources. Just think about the millions of women in the world who take oral contraceptives daily. Many other compounds that are used in cleaning solutions and personal care products may also exert a xenoestrogen effect, which means they may chemically resemble hormones and may then cause harmful effects in humans, and particularly sensitive individuals and animals, of course. And there's a theory that's been studied in this very moment, and it is that the increasing concentrations of sexual hormones in the environment may be one of the reasons why we keep seeing larger and larger numbers of prostate and breast cancer in humans. So now regarding international regulations, national actions, and public policy, I just want to mention that all the international regulations, national actions, and policy on this topic may be benefited from the adequate disposal of waste, and particularly from the adequate disposal of PPCPs waste. And we should we should think of this as our goal, or as a starting point to consider further actions of where we should start working. So there have been numerous international conventions at different points in time. 1992 Basel, about the protection of human health and environment from hazardous effects of dangerous waste. Then Stockholm in 2004, specifically about persistent organic contaminants. Rotterdam in 2004, Kyoto in 2005, and Minamata in 2013, specifically regarding mercury and mercury compounds emissions into the environment. So as you can see, there's a regulatory base that you can check, that you can consider, and that is important to know that it is already there. Of course, but I'm sure you have heard about the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. So we have 17 different sustainable development goals. I am sure that working on the adequate disposal of medication and personal care products has an impact in at least these goals that are highlighted here in yellow. So I invite you to reflect on this topic and on the broader image of the benefits that it might bring to the world and to each one of us. At a local and national adjustment consideration, or which management instruments we can use for this topic, of course, we have laws and regulations that we should consider. There are some countries that have already advanced on these issues, in this topic, and that you can definitely research or contact me if you require any further orientation or information. Besides laws and regulations, of course, we require executive agreements and planning that allows for those laws and regulations to work. We should implement economic instruments, think of voluntary agreements, particularly all public and private alliances that would, that would mean the success of these actions in the short and in the long term. And I would say probably most important of all, education and awareness on this topic. It always amazes me that all over the world people know the difference and know about recycling of glass bottles and aluminum cans and paper and the such, but no one is actually thinking about could I recycle the drugs that I use? What should I do with the leftover packaging of the drugs that I use on a daily basis? So education and awareness is definitely the pillar for any action to work and be successful in the long run. Regarding laws and regulations, of course, we have the basic elements. First and foremost, the basic protection of human and environmental health. This would mean maybe regulations on waste management sites, which many countries around the world already have. And maybe we should start, or each country should start by setting a classification system for the different type of wastes. We should also think about licenses for dangerous waste management facilities, and how to fulfill international treaties and obligations. Regarding regulations, we should start there, then considering this specific type of classification of residues, so that we can devise different regulations depending on these types of regulations. Let's say, for example, electronics. In many places around the world now, people are giving discounts when they buy new electronics if they bring their older equipment. So could we do that with medication or personal care products too? And also regarding regulations for product manufacturing, especially those that contain dangerous substances, I would emphasize on mandatory manufacturer extended responsibility programs, because these are, I believe, at least personally, that are one of the main ways in which we can succeed in this. As long as the manufacturer considers the unused product or expired product the responsibility for the company, we can ensure that these will be taken care of properly and that the residue will not reach the environment as easily. I will detail a little bit more on manufacturer extended responsibility programs in some slides ahead. We should also consider what management model we're going to use and the characteristics of the infrastructure that we already have going on, and think of the legal responsibility of environmental passives such as contaminated sites, dumps, and all of the sort. Other considerations may be rate fixing, some guidelines or requirements for the inspection of sites, and mandatory data registry and submission to the authorities are all considerations that you could think of when drafting a national plan or a regulation. And of course, the biggest challenge of this part would be how to achieve an effective application of these laws and regulations, but especially how are we going to ensure compliance with whatever is published and put into force. So now regarding strategic planning, specifically a part of strategic planning, first of all, we must think of waste management as a whole, as a national priority, and it should be given visibility, and it must be included within the interest and objectives at a local and a national level. We should also guarantee resources depending our priorities and promote financial sustainability of local and national waste management. Recognize and reconcile contradictory and or incoherent politics at all levels and for different types of waste. Let's remember that planning may not that planning may involve thinking about these different types and classifications of waste. We must also strengthen the capacity and knowledge to implement different programs, especially at the local levels. And we should also promote the development of national recycling programs and markets for recovered materials. Regarding economic instruments, I would say that this is a touchy subject, maybe a little bit, because when we talk about proper disposal initiatives, taxes and other charges may end up being a discouragement for companies or for regular uses for these programs. So rather than thinking of, punitive charges, what has been proven to work better are all types of systems that that reward or give benefits to the manufacturers or to the product users. So let's think about how can these type of collection services might be subsidized. Let's also think how can public purchases be sustainable? How can we prefer service providers that have demonstrated that they operate in a more green way? Or how can we give green bonds to different green bonds or awards or recognitions to companies that have advanced in the waste management topic, and particularly in the PPCPs waste management issues. Regarding voluntary agreements, I would have to emphasize here that maybe we could start by thinking of a temporary or an initial action to get everyone on board of managing the issue, and something maybe that in the beginning can be self-regulated and can be flexible to make people and companies want to chip in, and then think of specific sectors, such as those that manufacture or are related to hazardous waste, printer cartridges, electronic waste, and all of the sort. And specifically to think about concrete measures to see if we can recover, some type of the waste that we are producing. This is not as simple when we talk about pharmaceutical waste, because usually what is going to be disposed of cannot be reused, but for some other types of waste, this may be a very good consideration. And remembering always that even if we have voluntary agreements, some level of intervention may be required so that the actions, perform adequately. Education and awareness, of course, as I mentioned before, is key or is a pillar. What we must ensure from, the voluntary agreements and laws and regulations is that they have a permanence in time. And the only way we can accomplish that is by having people that are educated and aware of these issues, right? So we should start by sharing information regarding the impact of what we do on our regular basis, of what it means to take a medication and throw the leftover package in, the regular trash, for example. And of course, we should also consider what is the consumption pattern and the source of separation. Maybe combine campaigns with also some topics that should be part of the mandatory curriculum in schools or high schools, and how we can actually manage to maintain these education efforts over time. The other thing that's particularly important here, and that is very well known by NGOs, is that information has to be adapted, and in that we must rely on the locals to adapt the information and the messages so that they actually reach the public and they are adapted to a local reality. We must also think of what are the appropriate channels for each audience to make information as as simpler as possible, depending on our audience, and so that everyone knows, and can acknowledge for the same basic information. As I mentioned, build on the NGO's experience and be able to articulate between politics related to waste and education. So this is a huge part, and I believe this is the only way that our initiatives can be successful, in the long run. So there have been a lot of efforts in Latin America and the Caribbean to set up task forces and work groups to work on the agenda, the 2030 agenda on sustainable development. And according to ECLAC, as you can see in the map, there are currently a big number of committees and agencies that have been set up in many different countries. And rather than setting up these committees and these groups, hopefully in the long run, what this will mean is that we will have an significant impact in the long run, which is of course what we are all hoping for. There's a huge document published on that. You can see the reference right here in case any of you wanna check, this document thoroughly. Another thing that I believe is one of the most important things about this conversation today is what happens at the value chain level and at a domestic level. So most of you, I'm sure, know that the pharmaceutical industry is one of the most regulated industries in the world. It is actually the second most regulated industry in the world, only behind planes and aeronautics. So there are regulations and laws almost for everything having to do with pharmaceutical companies. So at a manufacturing site level, there are good practices and a number of laws and regulations that these sites must be compliant to. So this means that when medications, drugs are being manufactured, whatever hazardous residue is left, this has to be treated in order to make it safe and to release it to the environment. So the question here is not what happens to the waste at the manufacturing sites. The question here is what happens when pharmaceuticals and PPCPs in general reach the public and they are used in, at a regular domestic level, households, like the house of each and any one of us. What happens to the waste that is created at this domestic level? How do users know what to do with that waste, which is the question that I brought to you before, and I think is the biggest consideration regarding public policy, that usually domestic waste of pharmaceuticals and personal care products has not been taken into consideration in most of the drafts of laws and regulations. So I would advise for you to focus on this domestic situation and on a patient or consumer or user basis. How do we solve the problem from there, and not thinking specifically of the manufacturing sites or the industrial or commercial sites, because these are already regulated. Wholesalers and distributors, for example, have to comply to their own set of laws and regulations, and they cannot put pharmaceutical waste back into the environment. But then again, what to do at a domestic level is not included in laws, regulations, and specifically at a practical level, people don't know what to do with their pharmaceutical or PPCPs waste. So regarding actions and reduction proposals, there's something that I would like to emphasize on, as I mentioned earlier, which are drug post-consumer return programs. So many countries around the world have developed or implemented these drug return programs. Sometimes they are called take-back programs. They are usually public and private alliances or programs or systems developed by, for example, by a specific chain of pharmacists or pharmacies. And what they do is, have containers at different sites so that regular drug users can go to these pharmacies or to these stores and by themselves put these leftover packages or drugs in these containers, which will be disposed of properly and guarantee that this is waste that is not going to be put into the environment. So this is I would say, a practical way of making this issue seen by people, of at least wondering what it is that they are looking at in the pharmacy or in the hospitals. And this also helps to tackle this issue by many different focuses. One of the things that we really have to keep in mind here is that inadequate disposal of drugs, of unused drugs, not only is an environmental concern, as we have been, mentioning or during this morning, but there are also some other public health issues that can be tackled by drug post-consumer return programs. As I mentioned, for example, let's think about microbial resistance. It would be great if every time that we have a antibiotic leftover package, or we were given the instruction by our doctor not to finish an antimicrobial treatment, it would be great if we didn't have to throw that residue in the regular garbage, and we could deposit it in these containers. This would at least help a little bit in all these microbial resistance issue, right? So environmental consequences also, as I talked about, the antimicrobial or microbial resistance to drugs. And there's a third issue which is very, very important, and I am sure you have also heard about this, and it is the falsification of health products. So every time a drug package or an unused treatment goes into regular garbage, it can be repurposed, to say, to give it a word, by people that are in the black market and that are looking for ways to copy drug packaging and to sell it in the black market as falsified or counterfeit drugs. So every time a medication container or a drug as such is thrown into the garbage, we are giving enough information and the basics for these counterfeiters to keep putting counterfeit drugs in the black market. So as you see, and as I mentioned in the case report of the vultures, this is a whole chain. It's not just how do we protect the environment, but how do we also protect ourselves, and what can be the biggest steps we can take toward the protection of human health. And maybe when we say human health, it sounds like something that's not so close to us, but let's think about the drugs our children take, or our partner takes, or our parents take. It would not be impossible, nowadays in any country in the world, to end up having in your hand a falsified drug product. So drug post-consumer program not only helps protect the environment, but also help protect us as individuals from, for very unfortunate situations. Regarding consumer and user awareness, well, as I mentioned, I think, first of all, the initiatives should start by thinking of this. How do we raise awareness? How do we actually train the user or the consumer of drugs to think that this waste is not regular waste, and that it should be treated appropriately? Even at a professional level, like my generation and older generations, this is a topic we never spoke about in college, for example. And this is a topic that is usually not a hot topic between like health professional colleges or societies. And this is definitely something that has to be on the news, that we should be, all of us should be talking about, and sharing information and all of the sorts. So I would say we should not only focus on a specific group population, rather than we should be thinking on all the different types of public that need to hear this message, and that need to at least acknowledge this information. Oh, regarding water treatment technologies, which is one of the topics of today, of course, there are various technologies for removing pharmaceutical waste in water. Some of these processes are very effective, some are not as effective. As you can see here, some of these processes may have better removal range percentages than others. And as I mentioned before, not all types of process are useful for all the types of different pharmaceutical compounds that may be present in water. And there's a bunch of them, like you see there, ozonation, UV radiation, photolysis, dark and light phantom, UV rays, biomembrane, and especially at a pharmacological level, reverse osmosis is a very well-known process or treatment process for water. Then again, I would highlight the importance of thinking how can we prevent this waste to reach the water, rather than thinking how are we going to treat the water once it is polluted. It is certainly cheaper and it is certainly easier to prevent water treatment plant level. So that is definitely a very important consideration. Regarding the innovative proposal parts, I would encourage you to visit this association. It's the Latin American Association of Desalination and Water Reuse. There's no relation with me and this an association in particular, rather that I think that they have been advancing a lot on raising awareness on how the efficient use or management of water can be an indicator of competitivity and social responsibility. So they have worked at various numbers of levels at the hotel level, food and beverage, and at local levels. And they have, I have been able to listen to their experience in different congresses and symposiums. And I think this can give you, an important set of ideas of how to actually start working in indicators that are effective and that will attract companies and people's in general, interest. So regarding circular economy principles, this is, well, basically what's proposed by the European Parliament that you can see here in the graph. Of course, first of all, we should start by thinking of preserving and enhancing natural capital. Also to optimize resource return or circulation. As I mentioned, in the case of pharmaceuticals, maybe this is not as easy as it would be for other types of products because we cannot recycle drugs like in the traditional definition of recycling, but maybe some of the waste may be somehow reduced or reused. And specifically thinking about circular economy, we should also think about efficiency, about how to minimize links and punitive external costs, particularly to users. So it's also a task on its own, to think about these circular economy principles regarding PPCPs and pharmaceutical products in particular. We should also be thinking about how to, to set out who are the stakeholders on the whole value chain of pharmaceutical products personal care products, because I think these different stakeholders, in particularly the manufacturers, have to be held responsible for extended responsibility. And I think that is also one of the pillars too, right? We have had advances over time in regulations, for example, for tire manufacturers and for electronic manufacturers. This should be the case also for drug manufacturers. Then again, I insist on the domestic level and not the manufacturing site or industrial level. How can these stakeholders, how can these product manufacturers be held responsible for what happens with the product at a domestic level? We have, I think, now enough experience with other types of waste that can light the way of how we can manage plans and laws and regulations specifically set out to reduce the impact of pharmaceutical waste, residue, and pollution. So, well, this is what I had for you. And I really wish to know if you have any questions, if there's anything that you would like me to focus a little bit more on. I don't know, Paula, if anyone has given you any specific questions, or if there's something that you would like to talk about, this would be a good moment.
We don't have questions yet. If you have any questions, you can raise your hand or write it in the chat box. Maybe, Marisol, if you can talk to us a little bit about your experience with Punto Seguro.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe like 10 or 12 years ago, a group of colleagues, as Paula mentioned, I'm a pharmacist, a registered pharmacist. Some years ago here in Costa Rica, a law was published that held pharmaceutical sites like wholesalers and drug manufacturing plants were held accountable for pharmaceutical waste. And this regulation was published, I think, maybe like 12 or 13 years ago, something like that. And when we as pharmacists first looked at this regulation, the first idea that popped into our heads was, how come how come this regulation does not specify the responsibility of the waste that is produced at a domestic level? And especially because since many years now, Spain, Portugal have already had, very stringent laws regarding pharmaceutical manufacturers' extended responsibility. So at that point in time, we started thinking, okay, so the regulation doesn't cover domestic waste. What can we do as, as professionals, as health professionals, pharmacists, to try to tackle this issue? It was not a new idea necessarily, because take back or return programs were already happening in Mexico, in Portugal, in Spain, in Colombia. But we started thinking about how can we set up this type of program at a local level, at a national level in Costa Rica. So a few years ago, we started with this take back or return program that is called Punto Seguro. It is to this day mainly a private initiative, but we have also been able to create very useful and efficient private and public alliances too. And especially the first aim of our program is to raise awareness on the issue. So we also consider that it's not a matter of actually measuring what the amounts or the quantities of active ingredients in the water and in the soil. It is not only a matter of having people bring back their leftover treatments or packages, but what we find to be the most important of everything is to have data, to know what it is that people are throwing away, what are the drugs that are being left unused, and what this means for our country in terms of, economical investment budget, and how can we actually have an impact. As long as we are able to know, as long as we are able to process the data to know what people are disposing of, we can then, channel our efforts to tackle the most important issues. Um, for some period in time, falsification and counterfeiting of drugs was not a big issue in Costa Rica. It now currently is. So what the program has allowed for us is even to know that every time we analyze the data, we have more and more counterfeit products that are put back into our containers. So this also raises the question how many people in our country at a local level are consuming counterfeit drugs. So a return program or a take back program can be an initiative that's voluntary, that as long as it is channeled properly, it might have a big impact in the long run. It might become a platform to share information, like today we are having this opportunity, and especially, as I mentioned, to design how are we going to educate people on this topic, how are we going to raise awareness, and at the end of the day, specifically how we are going to prevent this waste from reaching the water and from reaching the environment. So there has been, as I mentioned, more experience on take back programs. In the United States, for example, they have rallies. They set up one day at a pharmacy or at a hospital, and that day users and consumers can bring all their unused stuff or all their unused PPCPs from home and take them to this pharmacy or this site where they are picking up these drugs. Some alliances also have made campaigns of reminding people to check their medicine cabinets at least twice a year. So they set up rallies every 6 months or so that people start developing culture regarding this type of waste management. What has been proven to work more in the long run, because it keeps the issue, presence and maintained, is actually having a permanent program that works and that everyone knows about. But mostly, I think the most important and the idea of this altogether is that maybe you don't have to have everything defined or set up to start with an initiative or with little actions. Any little action that you take, if it goes toward developing a take back program, well, wonderful, but any little action that you take will have a huge impact in the long run. So that is what we really want you today to think of. What could you actually do at a local level on your experience and with the resources of your country or your community, or at a local level? What little things could you do? What could you think of? What could be the obstacles that you would find, and how can these be overcome? Because more and more all around the world, people are looking for ways to overcome these obstacles, and I think we have been doing fairly well. We now just have to work harder at it. I don't know if anyone has any other questions by now.
Yes, we have a question. If there is not current take back program at pharmacies or large scale recycling programs, how do you suggest person dispose of their unused or expired PPCPs?
Okay, that's a great question. And it is important for each and every one of us to know what to do. First of all, if you have a leftover package, specifically the carton boxes, the outer boxes, I would suggest that you would turn them into pieces, a small the smaller size the piece, the better, thinking that no one can put that box together again, and no one can take a picture of this box or photocopy the box, just as reduce this box to as little as nothing so that it cannot be repurposed for anything else. That would be my first recommendation. Any type of packaging that doesn't have any leftover drug in it, cut it up, tear it, or whatever, mix it with additional paper or carton so that it goes into the recycling bins, as long as you cannot, as I mentioned, as long as it cannot be turned back into what it was. So that would be the first recommendation. The second recommendation is the FDA issued a statement some years ago of what to do if you have a little leftover medication at home, especially if you have like a bunch, a little amount of pills or capsules left at home. What they say is that after you brew your coffee, you take that little coffee leftover, those, the grains, and mix those little amount of pills or capsules that you have left over, mix them with the coffee, put them in a bag, and throw that bag into the regular garbage. When the acidity of the coffee interacts with the active ingredients, it usually helps to neutralize them. So this is a way to do this. This implies that what we have left over is very little, 5, 6, 7 tablets. This is usually not the case at a domestic level. Usually we, or at least from our experience here, what we see is that people have, a bunch, a very big amount of different products and drugs that they need to throw out. But if you have a little leftover, that would be the safest way to go. And I would really encourage you maybe to find some, waste treatment plant in your country, or if there is already an incinerator of residue, um, to create some type of alliance so that you can, pick out to start building these, to start building this culture. And if you are able to set that up, you can tell people never throw anything away in the regular garbage. Just wait for the next rally, or for the next date in which we are going to be taking back drugs, right? So there's no safe way. There's not one size fits all approach, as I mentioned before, but especially pretty much destroy all packaging as much as you can. And if you have little, solid forms left over, mix them with coffee and put them into the regular garbage. That would be the FDA's recommendation on that.
Thank you, Marisol, for your answer. Um, I would like to know how to approach like these topics that have a high technical content with the general populations. Perhaps you can tell us from your experience.
Yes, I think the easiest way to do this is thinking. People already know. well, most people in most countries already know that, plastic should go in one bin, that organic residue should go in another bin, that aluminum cans should go in another bin, and so on and so forth. So I think the easiest way for us to start talking about this issue is have people understand that pharmaceutical waste is another type of waste, just as paper and aluminum and glass should be handled separately. Especially talking about and raising awareness on that these residue on the environment can be harmful to them. That waste or pharmaceuticals in water and in the soil can actually affect them, can affect their health, and that it's very important for them to not treat this type of waste as any other type of waste. And also that they should be the voices, for requiring from their governments and from their local governments how to address this issue. I don't think it's terribly complicated. I would start just by, as I mentioned, explaining further to people so that they understand that pharmaceuticals and personal care products should be handled separately, and specifically that we should avoid at all costs to throw this waste into our regular garbage.
Thank you, Marisol. I don't know if we have any other questions. You can raise your hand or open your mic. Marisol, I think we can move on to the education activities.
Okay, so well, regarding the education activities that you have to, that are planned for this module, the first activity is regarding a forum, an opinion forum, and it is basically the question that I have already set out for you. Given the possibility of establishing an action plan in your country for preventing environmental impact of inadequate medicine disposal, which do you consider are the main barriers or obstacles, and how do you believe these may be overcome? So, of course, depending on where we are located, these barriers or obstacles will be different, and the ways to tackle them will be different also. So this forum is for you to comment on this topic, to give us insight on what you believe these obstacles or these barriers would be, and especially how do you believe you can overcome these obstacles. You should do this. I mean, you should write this opinion on the forum. Must be at least 500 words. And also we would really like for you to give us your opinion on at least two of your classmates' opinions too. So we really want to know if what you're thinking is on the same level or at the same level of what your classmates are thinking of. So, I mean, there are no right or wrong answers. We just would really appreciate to know your opinion. What do you consider these obstacles would be in your country or in your community or at a local level? And what would you advise would be the best ways to overcome these obstacles and barriers? So opinion is very important, of course, but we also would like for you to create a tool for sharing information on this topic. As I mentioned in the presentation, one of the main tasks we have here is raising awareness and education. So we are thinking of this blog as a tool, as an instrument for you to communicate what you believe are, the most important facts on this issue and how any regular person can have a positive impact. So to build this blog, we have given you a format already. The format has a heading, which is what you can see in the image on the right in green. So in the heading, you should write the title of your blog, the logo if you have one, and basically a description of the blog. And if you want to, you can add any social media links that would be, interesting for what you're writing. Then the main column, that is the one in gray, is the main part of the blog. The idea here is for you to detail the information of why, if we dispose of PPCPs inadequately, this is going to have environmental consequences. So the main column is the main part of the blog. And the idea here is that you can develop all these ideas regarding the environmental consequences of the inadequate disposable, of PPCPs and pharmaceutical products too. And you should include a title. You can include an image if you want to, and you should also include your name as the author of this blog. Another part of the blog that you can consider is the sidebar, which is the one on the right in a peachy kind of color. So in this column, you can either keep it or you can take it away. It's optional. You can add any additional information there that you consider. I would suggest, for example, definitions on certain terms, or you can add links to other documents or mention research, specific research that has been done on this topic, or local or national sites that are related to this topic. You can also add a search bar, for example, and well, it's mainly free if you want to keep it or if you want to leave it, and it's fine whatever information you can add there. The footer is at the bottom part of the blog, of course, and you can add whatever, I don't know, privacy policy if you want to, or legal claims. You can add your contact information in case anyone wants to get in contact with you as of the information they read on that blog. The idea is that this is something that could be digitalized or that could be put into a written document that you can give to people as a reference or as a basic information on this topic. So this is what I had for you today. I hope that you have some new ideas, some new topics to think about, especially to think about that every small effort matters and has an impact, especially regarding this type of waste. And that if we start with small and individual efforts, this could become a huge thing, and we can start having regular programs all over the world, just as there are programs for other type of disposal collections nowadays. So well, this is it on my part. I hope you enjoyed it. I thank you very much for your time and for your attention, and I hope that this is useful for you in the near future.
Thank you, Marisol. Do we have any questions regarding the evaluation activities? Yes, Gabriela? Gabriela, we can hear you. Gabriela, maybe if you want to write it in the chat, we can assist you because we cannot hear you. Something really important regarding to the blog, it is that you have to present it in like a Word document or like a PDF. So you have the space in the virtual campus, so you can put your blog in there. I don't know if we have any questions. Okay, I'm gonna move on to close the meeting. Thank you very much, Marisol, for your presentation. We have reached the end of the synchronous sessions of Module 6. We remind you to review the virtual campus where you will find the evaluative activities, also today's presentation, as well as the recording of the session and bibliographic materials to deepen it the subject. Also, your opinion is very important to us, so we thank you for sharing your feedback of this module through a survey whose link will be sent at the end of the week. Also, the information collected in this survey will allow us to develop a continuous improvement of the modules. It has been an honor for us to facilitate this space, and I would like to thank you on behalf of the German Agency for International Cooperation and ICAP for your valuable participation. I will also like to thank you for all your attention in this module. I may miss the day and time. Thank you. I would like to thank you for your participation, and it has been an honor for me to be the person that um, it is with you through all these academic programs. So thank you very much. You can disconnect now.
Thank you. Bye bye.